The madman was eating from the gutter when Mrs. Adanna Okafor's driver slowed down at the Onitsha traffic light, and that's when she saw his face. Her scream made the driver slam the brakes so hard that the Mercedes jerked forward, nearly hitting the car in front. But Mrs. Adanna wasn't seeing the traffic, wasn't hearing the angry horns around them. She was staring at the man covered in filth, matted hair hanging over his face, fingers black with dirt as he shoved something rotten into his mouth. Because that man had her son's eyes, her dead son's eyes. "Madam, what had happened?" the driver asked, panicked. But Mrs. Adanna couldn't speak. Because 15 years ago, she had buried her only son, Chinidu. She had watched him lower his coffin into the ground. She had mourned him every single day since. Her boy was dead. So why was he standing 15 feet away, alive, but living like an animal on the streets? Asterisk before I continue. Hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will shake you to your core. Asterisk. Mrs. Adanna threw open the car door before the driver could stop her. She didn't care about the traffic, about the expensive shoes on her feet, about the fact that she was supposed to be on her way to a women's meeting at church. She ran toward the man, her handbag swinging wildly, her carefully styled wig nearly falling off. "Chinidu!" she screamed. "Chinidu!" The man looked up, his face a mask of confusion and fear. But those eyes, those deep brown eyes that she had looked into the day he was born, that had smiled at her when he took his first steps, that had closed forever in a hospital bed 15 years ago, those eyes were the same. But what happened when she reached him would change everything she thought she knew about grief, about truth, and about the people she had trusted most in her life. The man scrambled backward like a frightened animal, mumbling incoherently. Up close, he looked about 24, maybe 25, exactly how old Chinidu would have been if he had lived. His clothes were rags, his body was thin, his face was covered in sores and an unkempt beard. But it was him. She knew it was him. "Chinidu, it's Mummy, my baby." But what happened next was heartbreaking. The man didn't recognize her. He kept backing away, shaking his head violently, making strange sounds that weren't quite words. People were gathering now, staring at this well-dressed woman trying to grab a madman. "Madam, leave that man alone, oh," someone said. "That one mad person. He fit get disease." But Mrs. Adanna wasn't listening. She reached for the man again, and this time she caught his arm. The moment she touched him, something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, maybe, or just terror. He wrenched himself free and ran, disappearing into the crowd at the motor park. "Chinidu, come back, please." Mrs. Adanna tried to follow, but the driver had caught up to her, holding her back. "Madam, I beg, that man mad person. He no be your Pekin. Your son don die. We bury am. Remember?" But what if they hadn't? What if everything she'd been told for 15 years was a lie? The driver managed to get Mrs. Adanna back to the car, but she was shaking so violently she could barely sit. Other drivers were honking, shouting at them to move. The driver pulled away from the traffic light, but Mrs. Adanna wasn't done. "Turn around," she said. "Madam," I said, "turn around. We have to find him." "But madam, we go late for her." "I don't care about the meeting. That man is my son. Turn this car around now." But what made a mother so certain? How could she know, after 15 years, after a funeral, after a burial, that a madman on the street was her child? They drove around the motor park for an hour. Mrs. Adanna's eyes scanned every corner, every alley, every group of homeless people. But the man had vanished. Finally, as the sun began to set and the driver kept insisting they had to go, Mrs. Adanna agreed to head home. But she wasn't going to let this go, because something had awakened in her, something that had been dead for 15 years. Hope. That night, Mrs. Adanna couldn't sleep. She kept seeing that man's face, those eyes, the way it looked at her for just a split second before running away. She got out of bed and went to Chinidu's room, the room she kept exactly as it was the day he died. His school uniform still hung in the closet. His books were still on the desk. His favorite teddy bear sat on the bed. She pulled out the photo albums and started going through them, picture after picture of her son, his christening, his first day of school, his 9th birthday party, his secondary school graduation photo, taken just months before he got sick. But what if he hadn't died? What if someone had lied to her? The thought was insane. She had been at the hospital. She had seen him deteriorate. The doctors had said it was malaria that had gone to his brain. Cerebral malaria, they called it. He had been in a coma for 3 days. And then, on the 4th day, the doctor had come out with that look on his face. The look that said there was nothing more they could do. Her husband, Chief Okafor, had been there too. They had held each other and wept. They had planned the funeral together. They had picked out the coffin together. And on that terrible day, they had watched as their only son was lowered into the ground at the cemetery in Nui. But what if the coffin had been empty? Mrs. Adanna stood up so quickly the photo album fell to the floor. The thought was crazy, impossible, but it wouldn't leave her mind, because she hadn't actually seen Chinita's body after he died. Chief Okafor had insisted on a closed casket funeral. "It's better this way," he had said. "Remember him as he was, not as he is now." She had been too destroyed by grief to argue. But now, 15 years later, that decision seemed suspicious. But what would make a father fake his own son's death? What kind of monster would do that? The next morning, Mrs. Adanna didn't tell her husband about what she'd seen. Chief Okafor had remarried 2 years after Chinita's death, a younger woman named Blessing who now had 2 children with him. He had moved on. But Mrs. Adanna, even though they were divorced, had never truly moved on. She had stayed in the house he'd bought for her, living with the ghost of their son. Instead, she called her younger sister, Ngozi, the only person she trusted completely. "Ngozi, I saw him." "Saw who?" "Chinidu. I saw Chinidu yesterday." There was a long silence on the phone. Then, very carefully, Ngozi said, "Ada, have you been taking your medications? Remember what the doctor said about the grief episodes." "I'm not having an episode. I saw him. He was at Onitsha Motor Park, living on the streets like a mad person." But what happened next would test even a sister's loyalty. Ngozi agreed to meet her, not because she believed her, but because she was worried about her mental state. They met at a restaurant in Auca, halfway between their 2 cities. Mrs. Adanna could see the concern in her sister's eyes, the way she kept looking at her like she was fragile, breakable. "Ada, I know you miss him." "This isn't about missing him. Ngozi, I saw him. Those were his eyes. A mother knows her child's eyes." "But, Ada, we were all at the funeral. We saw the coffin. Uncle Emeka gave a eulogy. Pastor Obi prayed. We buried him." "Did you see his body?" Ngozi paused. "What? Did you actually see Chinita's body? Before the funeral? After he died? Did anyone?" But what was Mrs. Adanna really asking? And why did Ngozi's face suddenly change? "Now that you mention it," Ngozi said slowly, "I remember being confused about the closed casket. You know, in our family, we always do open casket. But Chief Okafor was very insistent. He said the body was too damaged from the illness, that it would be traumatic for people to see. And we just accepted that. Ada, we were all in shock. You were barely functioning. And Chief Okafor seemed so destroyed. Why would he lie about his own son's death? But that was the question, wasn't it? Why would he? Mrs. Adanna pulled out her phone and showed Ngozi a picture she found online late last night. A photo of young adults with cerebral malaria who had recovered. Look at this. The doctor said Chinita died from cerebral malaria. But look, some people survive it. Some go into comas and wake up. Some have lasting effects like memory loss, like cognitive damage, like madness, Ngozi whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. But what if Chinita hadn't died? What if he had survived, but with severe brain damage? What if Chief Okafor, unable to handle a disabled son, a grown son who would never work, never marry, never give him grandchildren, had decided it was easier to let him die on paper? The thought was so monstrous that both sisters sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Ngozi said, "We need to find that man. We need to find out the truth." But what they were about to uncover would be darker than either of them could imagine. For the next week, Mrs. Adanna and Ngozi went to Onitsha every day. They drove around the motor park, the markets, the streets where homeless people gathered. Mrs. Adanna showed Chinidu's picture to street vendors, other homeless people, anyone who would listen. Most people looked at her like she was the mad one. But on the fifth day, an old woman selling oranges said, "Ah, that man, the tall one who no day talk. He day sleep under the bridge near the river. But he day fear people well. But what had made him so afraid? And how did a 19-year-old young man end up alone on the streets of Onitsha? They found him on the sixth day. He was huddled under the Niger Bridge, surrounded by other street people. Mrs. Adanna's heart broke all over again seeing him like this. Her baby, her beautiful son, reduced to this. He was tall now, a man's frame, but so thin, so wasted. This time, she approached slowly, carefully. She had brought food, not restaurant food, but the kind of food street people would eat. Bread and akra. She sat down several feet away from him and placed the food on the ground. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said softly. "I just want to talk." But what happened next gave her hope. The man looked at the food, then at her, then back at the food. Slowly, he crawled forward and grabbed the bread. As he ate, Mrs. Adanna moved slightly closer. "What's your name?" she asked. He didn't respond, just kept eating. "My name is Adanna. I had a son once. He looked just like you." The man paused, bread halfway to his mouth. Something flickered across his face. His name was Chinidu. Do you know that name? Chinidu. But what happened next confirmed everything. The man looked up at her, and for just a moment, his eyes cleared. His mouth opened, and in a voice rusty from disuse, he whispered one word. "Mummy." Mrs. Adanna's hands flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. Ngozi, who had been standing back, gasped. "Yes, baby. Yes, I'm your mummy. I'm here. Mummy is here." But what happened next broke her heart again. The clarity in his eyes vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He dropped the bread and scrambled backward, returning to that frightened, confused state. He began rocking back and forth, mumbling to himself. "We need to get him to a hospital," Ngozi said. "Now." But what they didn't know was that getting him to a hospital would uncover a conspiracy that went deeper than they'd imagined. They convinced him to come with them. It took more food, patience, and Mrs. Adanna's gentle voice reminded him over and over that she was his mother. When they finally got him into the car, he was shaking, looking around wildly like he expected to be hurt. Mrs. Adanna took him straight to University Teaching Hospital in Enugu, the same hospital where Chinidu had supposedly died. She demanded to see the records from 15 years ago. But what the hospital told them made no sense. According to their records, Chinidu Okafor had died on July 23rd, 15 years ago. Cause of death, cerebral malaria. The death certificate had been signed by Dr. Okachukwu Nwosu, the attending physician. "I want to see Dr. Nwosu," Mrs. Adanna demanded. "Dr. Nwosu no longer works here, Ma. The records clerk said he resigned about 14 years ago. Moved to South Africa, I think." "How convenient," Ngozi muttered. But what they needed was proof. So Mrs. Adanna insisted on a DNA test. "This man and I, we need a DNA test. Now." The test took 3 days. 3 agonizing days during which the man stayed in the hospital under observation. The doctors confirmed what Mrs. Adanna had suspected. He had severe brain damage consistent with cerebral malaria that had gone untreated for too long. He had memory issues, cognitive impairment, and had likely been living on the streets for years. But what nobody could explain was how a 19-year-old with severe brain damage ended up alone on the streets of Onitsha. On the 3rd day, the doctor called Mrs. Adanna into his office. His face was grave. "Mrs. Okafor, the DNA results are back." Her hands were shaking. "And there's a 99.9% match. This man is your biological son." The room spun. Ngozi caught her as her knees gave out. Because it was one thing to believe, to hope, but to have it confirmed, to know with absolute certainty that her son had been alive all this time, living in hell while she mourned him. But what had happened? How had this happened? Mrs. Adanna demanded answers. She went to the police. She filed a report. She wanted to know who had taken her son, who had abandoned him on the streets, who had let her believe he was dead for 15 years. The police began investigating. They pulled hospital records. They tried to locate Dr. Nwosu in South Africa. They questioned hospital staff who had been working 15 years ago, but what they found was a wall of silence. Everyone claimed to remember the case, to remember the young man dying, but nobody had any explanation for how he ended up alive, until one nurse, older, close to retirement, pulled Mrs. Adanna aside and whispered that Dr. Nwosu, he was Chief Okafor's cousin. I always thought it was strange how quickly everything happened, how your husband insisted on taking the body immediately, how there was no autopsy. But who was I to question the chief? But what was she saying? That Chief Okafor had orchestrated his own son's fake death? Mrs. Adanna felt sick, but she needed to confront him. She needed to hear it from his mouth. She showed up at his mansion in Enugu, the house he now shared with his new wife and their 2 children. He looked shocked to see her. Adanna, what are you doing here? Our son is alive, Okafor. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked like he might collapse. Then, quickly he recovered. What nonsense are you talking? Our son died 15 years ago. No, you made me think he died, but he's alive. He's been living on the streets of Onitsha like an animal while I cried for him every night, while I visited his grave, while I lived in hell. But what was his excuse going to be? How could anyone justify what he'd done? Chief Okafor looked around nervously, then grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the house, away from where his new wife might hear. His grip was tight, almost violent. You need to stop this, he hissed. Whatever you think you know. I have DNA proof. The hospital confirmed it. That man is Chinedu. And then Chief Okafor's face changed. The mask of the respected businessman, the pillar of the community, fell away. What was left was something cold, calculating. So what if he is? He said quietly. Look at you. You found him, and now what? You think you've won? That man is damaged. Adanna. He's useless. He can't think, can't talk properly, can't do anything. Do you know what people would have said about me, about our family, if I had a son like that? A grown man who acts like a child. But what Mrs. Adanna heard in that moment was a confession of a monster. You did this, she whispered. You arranged everything. The fake death certificate, the closed casket. You paid off Dr. Nwosu. And then what? You just dumped our son on the street like garbage. Chief Okafor looked away. I gave him to someone, a distant relative, someone who promised to take care of him quietly, away from here. How was I supposed to know she would abandon him? That wasn't the plan. The plan? The plan. Mrs. Adanna was screaming now. You had a plan to make your own child disappear because you were ashamed of him? But what hurt even more was what he said next. He wasn't my son anymore, Adanna. Not the son I wanted. Not the son I had dreams for. That man in the hospital after the malaria. He was a shell. He couldn't recognize me. Couldn't feed himself. The doctor said he might never recover. Do you understand? I couldn't have people seeing me with a son like that. I couldn't have my business associates, my political connections, seeing a grown man who couldn't even function. It would have destroyed everything I'd built. But what about the young man? What about Chinedu? What about the innocent person who had done nothing wrong except get sick? Mrs. Adanna slapped him hard. The sound echoed in the quiet compound. Chief Okafor's hand went to his face, shocked. You are going to jail, she said, her voice deadly calm. You're going to pay for what you did to our son. You think anyone will believe you? Chief Okafor laughed bitterly. I'm Chief Okafor. I have connections in this state that you can't imagine. You have a madman and a DNA test. I have money, power, and a story that's already been accepted for 15 years. Who do you think people will believe? But what Chief Okafor didn't know was that Mrs. Adanna was recording everything on her phone. The case exploded across Nigeria. The recording of Chief Okafor's confession went viral. News stations picked it up. Social media erupted. Here was a wealthy man who had faked his son's death because a young man was disabled. Here was a father who had chosen his reputation over his child's life. The police had no choice but to act. Chief Okafor was arrested. Dr. Nwosu was extradited from South Africa. The distant relative who had been paid to take Chinedu and who had instead abandoned him in Onitsha was found and arrested too. But what about Chinedu? What happened to the young man at the center of this nightmare? Mrs. Adanna brought him home. Not to the house Chief Okafor had bought her. She sold that and moved. She wanted a fresh start, a place with no memories of lies and betrayal. She bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood in Auka, with a garden where Chinedu could sit and be calm. The doctors said his condition would likely never fully improve. The brain damage was extensive. But with therapy, with love, with consistency, he could have a better life than he'd had on the streets. But what amazed everyone was how quickly he began to respond to his mother's presence. It was like some deep part of him remembered her, remembered safety, remembered love. He started eating regularly. He stopped being so frightened all the time. He learned to sleep in a bed again instead of on hard ground. And slowly, very slowly, some words started coming back. Not many, but enough. Mummy, water, food, thank you. But what broke Mrs. Adanna's heart and healed it at the same time was a night, 3 months after she'd found him, when he had a nightmare. He woke up screaming, thrashing, clearly back in some terrible memory of living on the streets. She ran to his room and held him, rocking him like she had when he was a baby. And as he calmed down, as his breathing slowed, he looked at her with those eyes she'd recognized in a madman at a traffic light. And he said clearly, Mummy stayed. Mummy came back. Because that's what he thought, wasn't it? All those years on the street, some part of him had been waiting for his mother to find him. And she had. But what about justice? What happened to Chief Okafor? The trial was a media sensation. Chief Okafor's lawyers tried everything, claiming his confession was coerced, that Mrs. Adanna had manipulated him, that there was no proof he'd done anything illegal. After all, Dr. Nwosu had signed the death certificate. The burial had been legal. How could he be blamed if his son had somehow survived and been abandoned by someone else? But what turned the case was the testimony of the distant relative, a woman named Ifeoma, who broke down on the stand. He paid me, she sobbed. Chief Okafor paid me 2 million naira to take the man and keep him hidden. He said the man was damaged, that he couldn't let anyone see him like that. He gave me money and told me to take him far away. I took him to Onitsha and I tried for a few months. But he was so difficult. He couldn't be controlled. He would wander off. He needed constant watching. And the money ran out. So I just left him one day, at the motor park. I told myself someone would find him, someone would help him, but nobody did, and I was too afraid to come back. But what she'd actually done was abandon a disabled young man to die on the streets. The judge's verdict was harsh. Chief Okafor was sentenced to 15 years in prison for child endangerment, fraud, and conspiracy. Dr. Nwosu got 10 years. Ifeoma got 7. But what sentence could ever make up for 15 years of a person's life stolen? Mrs. Adanna didn't attend the sentencing. She was at home with Chinedu, helping him work on a puzzle. It was a simple one, animals and their sounds. He was getting better at matching them, though it took time, patience. When Ngozi called to tell her about the verdict, Mrs. Adanna simply said, "Good," and went back to the puzzle. Because revenge, justice, punishment, those things couldn't give her back the 15 years she'd lost with her son. They couldn't give him back the young adulthood that had been stolen from him. All she could do now was give him a future. But what about the other homeless people? What about all the other mad people living under bridges, in motor parks, in gutters across Nigeria? How many of them had families who thought they were dead? How many of them were someone's missing child? That question haunted Mrs. Adanna. And so, 1 year after finding Chinedu, she started a foundation. She called it See Me, because that's what homeless people needed most. To be seen, to be recognized as human beings with stories, with families, with worth. The foundation worked to identify homeless people with mental illness, to reconnect them with families when possible, to provide care when reconnection was an option. They worked with hospitals to ensure proper death certificates, proper records. They advocated for better mental health care in Nigeria. But what made the foundation special was Chinedu himself. Because sometimes, on good days, Mrs. Adanna would bring him to the outreach events. He was proof that the mad person living under a bridge, the one people avoided and ignored, could be someone's beloved child. People would see him, this young man in his 20s who couldn't speak much, who got confused easily, but who was clean, fed, loved. And then they'd see the homeless people they'd passed by that morning with new eyes. But what about happy endings? Does this story have one? 5 years after Mrs. Adanna found her son at that traffic light in Onitsha, Chinedu turned 29. He would never be the son Chief Okafor had dreamed of, the doctor or the lawyer or the businessman. He would never attend university or get married or give his mother grandchildren, but he could smile. He could laugh when his mother told him jokes. He could help in the garden, carefully watering plants. He could hug people and mean it. He could say, "I love you," when prompted, and on rare, beautiful days, he would say it unprompted. And most importantly, he knew he was safe. He knew he was home. He knew his mother had found him and would never let him go again. Mrs. Adanna stood in her garden one evening, watching Chinedu chase butterflies with the unself-conscious joy of a child trapped in a man's body. He was laughing, that pure sound that she thought she'd never hear again. Ngozi came and stood beside her. "You saved him, Ada." But Mrs. Adanna shook her head. "No, he saved me. For 15 years I was dead inside, just going through the motions of living. Finding him gave me purpose again, gave me a reason to fight, gave me back my heart. Still, what you did, bringing him home, caring for him, starting that foundation, not many people would have done that. But what Mrs. Adanna had learned was this: love isn't convenient. Real love, parent love, the kind of love that matters, it's not about pride or reputation or what people say. It's about showing up. It's about staying. It's about seeing someone at their worst, their most vulnerable, their most broken, and saying, "You are mine, and I will not abandon you." Chief Okafor had failed that test. He had chosen his image over his son. And now he sat in a prison cell while his son lived free. Not free of his disability, not free of the scars those 15 years had left, but free of abandonment, free of neglect, free of the lie that he wasn't worth loving. The foundation grew. More families were reunited. More homeless people were given identities, medical care, dignity. And always at the center of it was the question Mrs. Adanna asked everyone. When you see a mad person on the street, do you see them? Really see them? Because that could be someone's child. That could be someone's whole world. But what about you? What about the mad person you passed this morning? The one you avoided eye contact with? The one you dismiss as crazy or dangerous or just another part of the landscape? What if that was someone's Chinedu? What if someone, somewhere, was grieving for that person, not knowing they were still alive, just lost? The truth is, we live in a society that discards people. The disabled, the mentally ill, the elderly, the vulnerable, we push them to the margins and pretend they don't exist. We build our lives around comfort and convenience, and anyone who challenges that comfort gets erased. But what Mrs. Adanna's story teaches us is that those people matter. Every single one of them is a person with a story, with a family, with worth that goes beyond their productivity or their ability or their mental state. And sometimes, just sometimes, if we take the time to really look, to really see, we might recognize someone's eyes staring back at us from a face covered in dirt in desperation. Mrs. Adanna never forgot that moment at the traffic light. She never forgot that split second when she could have looked away, could have told herself she was seeing things, could have driven on to her church meeting and let that man remain invisible. But she didn't look away. She saw him, and in seeing him, she saved him. And maybe that's the real moral of this story, not just about the evil of what Chief Okafor did, though that evil was real, but about the power of seeing, the power of refusing to look away, the power of insisting that every life matters, even a life society has given up on. Because somewhere in Nigeria right now, there's a mother sitting at a grave, mourning a child who might not actually be dead. There's a family who accepted a closed casket funeral without asking enough questions. There's a homeless person who remembers a home they can't get back to, a name they can no longer speak. And all it takes is one person to look, to really look, to see. Mrs. Adanna saw. And because she saw, Chinedu came home. Asterisk if the story moved you, if it made you think differently about the people you pass on the street. Hit that subscribe button. Share this story, because somewhere, someone needs to hear it. Someone needs to be reminded that it's not over until you stop looking, that hope is real, that love is stronger than shame, that a mother's instinct is never wrong. Subscribe, and remember, really remember, to see the people society has made invisible, because they matter. Every single one of them matters. Asterisk. Chinidu was home, and that finally was enough.